friction are the things that colleges and the system put into the process to make it harder to re-enroll, right? You're from higher ed, so you know what a catalog year is, but I'm stopped out for 3 years and I go to re-enroll and my catalog year changes and all of a sudden 2 or 3 courses that were in my major don't count anymore. I'm not gonna I'm that is just off-putting. Or if I have to reapply to the institution that I already started at, any number of points of friction like that make it hard. The institutions that are doing really well in this space have removed all the friction.
Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and welcome back to another episode of Office Hours, where we break down the latest trends in higher education and what those trends mean for students and educators. And I'm really excited about today's guest, Scott Lomas, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at ReUp Education. I guess to kick things off, Scott, would love to hear a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners. So I'm Scott Lomas. As you mentioned, I'm Chief Strategy Officer at ReUp Education. ReUp Education is the premier provider of services for colleges, universities, and state governments to re-enroll those students who have stopped out with some college and no credential. My role there as Chief Strategy Officer means I support a number of teams, the teams that directly support colleges and state governments, both in the development of the partnership and the management and growth of the partnership. And then I also serve on our executive team in terms of setting the short-term and mid-term strategy for the company.
Well, that's great, Scott. Guess just to give some context for listeners, how many, what are we talking as far as the number of people who have started college but not earned a degree? Can you give a little bit of a sense of kind of the scope of the problem?
Yeah, I talk to people about this all the time, and it's bigger than people think, right? It's just a bigger number, but college numbers are bigger than people think. The number of freshmen is several million every year, and total enrollment in college is some 18 million nationwide for undergrad and grad. So it's bigger than we all think. There's 4,000 institutions. These numbers are all bigger than average people who aren't spending their time in higher education sector a lot think. But the number of stopout students is north of 40 million. So if we put that in just a little bit of context for what does 40 million mean? A couple of ways to think about it. That's bigger than the membership of AARP. If there are politicians listening, it's 1 in 6 of the voters in your district. If we thought about this as like a healthcare issue, it would be a pandemic. The numbers are big.
Why do you think that this problem, why do you think it's been overlooked for so long?
I don't know that it has, right? I mean, I think I'm supposed to say it has because I think many colleges and universities overlook it because there's some inherent challenges with the population compared to the population that they serve, right? Colleges get replenished every year by 18-year-olds, right? We know where they're coming from. They're graduating from high school. Historically, they've taken tests. You can find their names. They have intent. It's what they're supposed to do is go to college. And that list, that comes in. Colleges compete for them, but they come in every year. You're an admissions director, right? Like you've been through that cycle, and so you've got your first time full time. You have your transfer students. Maybe you've got grad programs or online programs or something like that. That keeps your office pretty busy. And then, a lot of institutions, you've got to re-enroll 8, 10, 20, 30,000 students every semester. That keeps the office pretty busy. So to go back and try and find these people, it's just harder, right? I mean, they're hard to find. They often come with challenging situations about, enrolling. And just looking at the data, there's persistence challenges. So, I think a lot of colleges I don't want to speak for anybody, but it would be easy to make the assumption it's not worth our resources. What is certainly true is that it's more expensive for most colleges to recruit and retain these students compared to traditional age first time full time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's a good distinction just between, awareness of the problem, and just kind of the reality of how I think typically higher education can operate, and that, definitely resonates where, just it's logical from sort of a marketing perspective, from a student support perspective, just some of these like quote unquote traditional students are coming from high school. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, we're in admissions, there's a lot of talk about the demographic cliff and whether it's a clip or a gentle slope. There's, clearly less students who are graduating from high school who are going to be going to college. For colleges, that, causes all sorts of challenges, just, in terms of making your classes, as far as tuition revenue, ensuring that there's just enough students to fill the beds on campus if it's a residential school. And I'm curious, do you think that this, represents an opportunity, and do you have a sense of how, colleges like might be thinking about these, students with, some college no degree, to fill some of those spots that perhaps were previously they just had plenty of, high school students or transfer students to fill the spots?
I think from an FTE perspective, just an overall enrollment number, yes. Are they filling the same spots? No, right? They're not going to fill the residence halls, right? So there's a deeper problem here just around, higher education finance and what that means. The demographic cliff is here. That's easy to see. In most states, the number of high school graduates is going down. Um, if you look a little deeper into it, what we see is some really good news in the K-12 space, and that's that graduation rates in general are up over the last few decades. Numbers are good; they're strong. But on top of the fact that there are fewer students, just because there were fewer babies 18 years ago, the percentage of students who are graduating high school and going on to college is coming down by as much as 10 percentage points in a lot of states. So you've got the demographic cliff that is here, but it is amplified by the drop in the go to college rate in a lot of states. So yeah, it's here.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's, that's a good point. That's just like not as it's a different audience of students. That's not just like, I think, there's clearly an opportunity, but it's more complicated than just thinking, okay, you can just sort of think about these students in terms of traditional admissions process, traditional like, residential campus and supports where it's, definitely a different population. Yeah, I'm curious, and you don't have to name any specific institutions. Are there, you know, what types of models or what types of schools are you seeing doing a really like great job of engaging with these types of students?
Eh, can I go back to the previous question for a
Yeah,
second?
absolutely.
So let's put some numbers on it for people,
Yeah.
right? So in an average size state, you live in New Jersey, right?
Yes.
So in New Jersey, I'd have to double check my numbers here, but you're pretty close to an average size state. So you've got about 80,000 high school graduates a year statewide, right? That's roughly an average state. Um, you have 10x that number, or 800,000 New Jersey residents with some college no credential. So is there an opportunity here? Yeah, there's a big opportunity here, a really big opportunity. Um, but you know, folks don't re-enroll at a very high rate, right? When I talked about the go to college rate, we're looking at numbers between 50 and 70%. And those numbers matter. When we're looking at the some college no credential population, we're looking at numbers between 1.8 and 2.3% on an annual basis.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that is yeah. I mean, it does like make sense, I guess, as you if you really like drill down as far as like there is the I'm sure even for high school students, you're a senior, there's like the peer parent effect that's you do see a lot of your classmates as a sort of like a normalized part of you almost ritualized in American society, just this going from high school to 2 year 4 year college. But if you're
Absolutely.
working and have other responsibilities, you're not necessarily on that timeline with these milestones.
Yeah. And for folks that have a college degree, it's a minority portion of the population, and they tend to marry each other. So yeah, it's very common for people to be out there without a college degree and living and working around a bunch of people who don't. From inside higher ed, it's easy to forget that.
Yeah.
So, but I think your question was going back to your question that I passed over, which was, are there colleges that are doing well at it?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think everybody knows who they are, actually. Um, uh, the colleges that are doing well are largely the online national institutions, or primarily online institutions, or POIs, as we say on the inside. They're crushing it in this sector. The five or six biggest ones of those have some 25% of the market. It's astounding numbers, and it's the ones everybody sees on TV. It's Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors and UMGC and University of Phoenix, Arizona State. They're all doing really, really well in this space.
Yeah, what do you I mean, the online that, like, makes sense, just the, flexible, like, nature of the degree. I think, like, Western Governors is obviously really interesting just because their, model is a little bit different for credits, and you can, graduate in, on a different timeline. But are there other, like, that seems like a little surface level. Are there other things that you think these schools are just doing well that may have allowed them to grab this type of market share?
Yeah, sure. When we think about this population, we think about two things, right? And it's barriers and friction. The barriers, as we think about it, re-up, are the things in your life that are making it challenging to re-enroll today, right? And those might be extrinsic, like, you know, I have a job, or I have two jobs, right? And, or I'm taking care of a kid, or I'm taking care of an aging parent, or, money, any of these things. They could be intrinsic too, like motivation, which shouldn't be overlooked. And friction are the things that colleges and the system put into the process to make it harder to re-enroll, right? And there's any number of those. You're from higher ed, so you know what a catalog year is, but I'm stopped out for 3 years and I go to re-enroll and my catalog year changes, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 courses that were in my major don't count anymore. I'm not gonna I'm that is just off-putting. Or if I have to reapply to the institution that I already started at. Any number of points of friction like that make it hard. The institutions that are doing really well in this space have removed all the friction. Okay. It's not just that they're online. You're right. That is superficial. It's not just that they're online. It's that when you're ready to talk to them, they'll be ready to talk to you. Right. When you ask questions like, hey, Will, I want to go back and finish my degree. How much does it cost and how long will it take? Many, many, many traditional institutions say, well, that depends.
Our favorite word is admissions officers.
Yeah. 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 And you just lost that student in today's market, because the institutions that are serving a big number of adults, they have answers for those, right? And credits will transfer and they will work it out, and they can tell you how much it costs and how long it takes. So, I think the the schools that are doing well have given really long, hard thought to removing the friction, and then it comes down to how can you help people resolve the barriers in their life as well.
Yeah, no, that I think that's a really great synopsis of just some of the other things that are going on. I think yeah, just even taking a step back, thinking about something like just semester system where like that's like another barrier where you can there's only certain times of the year that you can start. I remember reading, I think it was called The Innovative University. It was co-written by Clay Christensen and profiled BYU Idaho. It was just really interesting just how they reimagined their, entire academic year, and just like it's like kind of illogical, like why there's no summer classes and you're just like spending all this like, resources to keep this like physical college plant alive and running, but you're just like not running classes or bringing in tuition revenue during that
Yep.
time. And it's also an off-putting thing for students when you just like had to wait and you just couldn't necessarily like start at any point of the year, which for you know busy, folks, like that just it seems like if you're told like, "Oh, you gotta wait 6 months," like, that just seems unlikely that you're gonna.
Yeah. Here, here's something. So I've been working in this space for about 30 years. And here's something really interesting. You mentioned online a minute ago, and maybe that's just a superficial factor, and maybe that's just how we do things these days. Um, 20 years ago, if you wanted to take uh, summer school, it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to stay in campus and do that, right? And almost without exception, no matter how resistant a higher ed institution may have been to online classes, well, it's okay in the summer, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, our whole summer catalog is on, you know. Um, so, you know, lots of traditional age students who are taking face-to-face classes year round just go online in the summer, including my son right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is, yeah, I think the I think especially after COVID too, the floodgates kind of opened just because, there were, clearly you're able to do it. And it's I don't know, it's interesting just the how the model, where, clearly that's yeah, that those rules have been bent. I'm curious, Scott, to I guess go back and kind of zoom in on some of these students from your like perspective research. What are some of the common reasons that students are leaving college and before they're finishing? I assume that it might be some of the things that you've outlined, but just curious if you have additional insights on that.
Well, I'll tell you what it's not. There's a lot of things that there's a lot of myths out there about, what this dropout population looks like, and do we want these students? They failed before, they're not good students, um, things like that. And we have particular insight to this because we work with, whole states, like in New Jersey, right? We work with all the 85% of the public institutions in New Jersey on a collective basis. So we get to see these data in an aggregate basis, across the state, and tell states, hey, this is what your population actually looks like, right? And what we see is often north of 80% of the students are academically eligible to re-enroll today, right? They might have a parking ticket hold that's keeping them back, but academically eligible, yeah. Same thing with Pell. Common myth. They've used all their Pell. They're not. They're not. That's just those things aren't the case. So I can tell you some things that are true. Um, One, they stop out all along the way. There's a lot of focus in the industry around if we're going to do this, let's get the low hanging fruit, right? Let's get the near completers and the recent stopouts, which makes sense on the surface. And if all you're going to do is, have a calling campaign a couple times a year, that's probably what I do too.
Hmm.
But that's only 12% of the whole population, right? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, just looking at the credit distribution, it's pretty evenly distributed between 0 and 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, 90 to 120 semesters, our credits there. So, you know, the there aren't simple solutions to this audience. And I think I don't want to pick on your question, but
No, that's okay.
I'm gonna focusing on why they stopped out is a simple solution, right? Um, it's not going to get anybody back, right? What we've learned at ReUp from doing this for 10 years, hundreds of colleges, millions of students, um, is we've got to focus on why they return. We need to understand that they need to embrace it or they're not going to succeed. That's really the question. We think of we think of it as there's a lifestyle change, right? Like you're going to think of what your schedule is in your life today, and that ends the day you re-enroll. You have a new schedule, right? You have money pressure, you have time pressure. It's a big commitment. It's like starting or stopping anything new, right? New Year's resolution kind of stuff. It doesn't stick if you just don't go, if you don't go into it knowing why and clear on your motivation and committed to it, it's not going to stick because it's not easy.
Yeah. I guess that like the question why, what are the common reasons people are going back? I have hunches just based off what you've said, but yeah, what is curious what the data on your end shows.
Well, you were right about one thing earlier. You've probably been right about lots of things, but you were you mentioned one thing earlier about traditional age students, and to be flippant, it is FOMO, right? That's you graduate from high school and you're 18, and half, 2/3 you're just going to college because that's what you do, right? Um, that's not a 35-year-old who's working a couple of jobs and might have a family, right? That's not like, oh, I guess I'll just go to college. This is a different kind of motivation, right? Um, it starts it Maslow pyramid. It starts here, right? I need to put food on the table. I need a better job. I can't get anywhere. That stuff is burning real for people out there who are stuck and left behind by the modern economy and all the tech jobs and knowledge jobs in the last 10, 20 years that have come up that they're not accessible to them. So that's what they've got to do first. That's why they go back.
Mhm.
Why they stay and finish changes. The closer they get, that motivation changes to just moves up the pyramid into um it's about fulfilling personal desire, right? And finishing a goal and satisfying that, and um making my kids proud. Like, I bet you said your mom went back to college. I bet if we asked your mom, she'd say she was doing that for you and to make you proud. My mom, same thing. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a different motivational environment for sure. To understand that. um and again, helping people tap into that. I mentioned lifestyle change. What I like to say is like, hey, this isn't like you got 3 or 4 months before your 20th high school reunion and you want to lose 5 or 10 pounds. That's not what this is. This is 2, 3, 4 years, right, of being on that kind of regimen and discipline. So you got to be really committed.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, interesting the framing just, immediate like that makes completely makes sense, the economic, and then it does shift to, something that might be a little bit more challenging to quantify exactly. I'm curious from your perspective. I know in the role that employers play in this. I know that Starbucks with their partnership with Arizona State and Walmart and companies have been offering some of these tuition benefits. And to be honest, I don't know a ton about how how frequently like they're taken advantage of or what completion rates look like. Just curious, I guess. Two questions: your take on those types of corporate higher ed partnerships, and then I guess more generally, just what is the role that employers have in all of this? If one of the big motivators is, better job and economic opportunities.
Well, I think the Fortune 1000 are doing a pretty good job in general, right? They have these programs and they're housed in different areas, but it's considered a benefit, right? It's called a tuition benefit for a reason. These employers know they need these to be competitive and attract employees. You're right, the utilization rates are low, right? So most people working for a Fortune 1000 company have a tuition benefit that they're eligible for, but only 2 or 3% are using it. Okay. And maybe that's understandable. Um, but it's there. So I think in general, they're doing a pretty good job, right? And they've got the resources to do it, and they need to do that to compete. Um, and there's a lot of people with opinions about what employers should do. Sure, it's easy to say they should support employees that are going back to college. Maybe they can do that with money. Maybe they can't. Um, but I think that again, the institutions that are doing well in this market, that are really capitalizing, on those kinds of employer partnerships, they structure it around that, right? You see, do you know 5250? Does that number mean anything to you?
No, what is that?
So 5250 is the amount of tuition benefit
Oh,
I can get from my
yeah.
employer that I don't have to report as taxable income, right? So you would take a look at some of these big national programs, and you'd be surprised at how many of them you can take one class per term and it comes right in under that 5250 limit, right? So they're just baked into the structure, and they should be if they have flexibility to do it. That's great, you know? Um, I think the other thing that they have to do is create jobs, and they're doing that. You know, if you look at the numbers on a state to state basis for every 100 jobs, you know, how many people have the right skills and credentials to fill that job, that's the gap that employers are complaining
Mm,
about. They're creating the jobs. They just, you know, jobs have moved on.
mhm,
They have. And they need people with the right skills and credentials to do it, or folks get left behind in the economy. So um, I think large employers are doing their thing. Mid-sized, smaller employers, you know, probably do it in maybe a less structured way. But um, I think they need to create jobs. If I'm going to say one thing, they're
mhm,
largely doing that. They need to create jobs. That's their part. Then the rest of us have got to chip in, right? Higher ed's got to chip in. State government's got to chip in to get people there. But you know, I don't think it's on the employers.
hmm.
Personally.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and the last part you mentioned the role of governments. That was gonna be actually my next question. I'm curious, just, looking at your work at ReUp and just, more generally what you're seeing. It also seems like, that is, something that government should be, local, state particularly should be incentivized to care about. And I'm curious what that looks like in practice.
Well, I mentioned New Jersey. That's a great example.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
New Jersey has said they're committed to it. There's been fabulous leadership, you know, in the office of the Secretary of Higher Education. And you know, Governor Murphy was started in his tenure and was very supportive of it. And it's, you know, it's generated great results. You know, in New Jersey, over 5,000 residents a year are re-enrolling through that program, and we're thrilled to support it. But it's rare to get, you know, that kind of support. The numbers are there, but it's rare to get that. So look, what what a lot of state government cares about is, you know, the economy. That's the job, right? Keep it, you know, keep people safe and keep people employed, and you know, all those kinds of things. But it goes back to what we said. There's this thing called a workforce pipeline, right? That's the number of people who are going through the system to get skilled and credentialed, right? If you rely on just those 80,000 high school graduates a year, and you know, the number that are going to college is decreasing, and it takes them 4, 5, 6 years to go through the process, and they don't have a lot of life experience at 22, etc. That's tough. Or you can focus on the 800,000 who are part of the way there, have several years of work experience, and would be, you know, mature employees. So I think it just makes good economic sense for states to say, you know, okay, historically we put all our resources on the go to college rate. Maybe we want to put some resources over here on this other population because it's huge, right? You know, you see that range, that go to college rate I talked about, that varies from like the low 50s to maybe 70% in a couple of states. Um, you know, if you could move the rate at which students are re-enrolling from 2% to 2.5% or 3%, that would dwarf the numbers coming out of high school. Dwarf.
Mm. Yeah, that is fascinating. Just the how I guess just the function of the math of it, just how big the population is, just a small percent is going to really move the needle. So Scott, I'm interested. You mentioned in New Jersey, a lot of public institutions have made this a priority. I'm just curious in terms of outcomes, if you're seeing differences between students who might be taking advantage of a more local higher educational option versus one of those large national more online focused institutions.
Sure. Well, I think there's some tangibles and intangibles in that, right? The tangibles we can see in persistence rates and graduation rates, um, and those vary a little bit, and they vary a little bit based on modality, right? Like online is just a little lower, so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, and they vary by institution type that's delivering online. But I think the intangibles to me are what are more interesting. The national institutions do a great job of understanding the macro trends in the economy and what different degrees and certificates and things are needed in the economy. And they do a good job of being nimble and flexible and growth oriented in their curriculum to make sure they have that on offer, right? The local institutions know what the region needs.
Hmm.
That's the difference, right? That's huge. And then I think the other intangible to that is ultimately you're going to be putting your resume up against somebody that has a degree from a local institution versus somebody that has one from a national institution. Um, and employers are going to look, and they will have preferences.
Hmm. No, that's a good reminder. Just really, might depend on the industry that you're working in, and something might skew much more regional, and the alumni network and the career services. But then there are probably also other organizations that are just going to take a different take on that. Interesting. Out of curiosity, just it's very interesting to me to think about, this just the size, the percent of people who are actually going back to school. I I like I like the word of intent, that it's not necessarily a high intent audience of people, just because they, may not necessarily be thinking about this. And, when I worked on the admission side, did a lot of enrollment marketing, and I'm just kind of putting on that hat. And I'm curious, with admissions offices and enrollment professionals, like what is the kind of strategy to, engage folks? Like, I don't know, when I
Sure.
lived in New York, I would see a lot of the, schools, in the subway, like that, like kind of like, I know that's a hard thing to track, marketing wise, but like is kind of logical in a sense. That's something that's high visibility. You're able to, appeal to, folks who might be on their way to work, or just, who maybe, they weren't thinking about going to school, and you're on the G train and just look up and, see the advertisement about CUNY, financial aid opportunities or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I work for ReUp. We work, with hundreds of universities. Like I think we're in 35, 36 states. We're starting in Maine now, so it could be 37. Um, just news today. That's hot off the press. Um, so let me give you all our trade secrets. Yeah. So first, like, win your backyard, right? You have these students. An average institution's got round numbers, 10,000 students on their stop out list. 10,000. Here's a little hint. If you can't win with them,
Hmm.
you're going to have a tough time competing in the adult market against all those big brands spending tens of millions of dollars. Okay. So get good at serving them first, right? Like learn that motion and that service motion to be able to repeatedly do that to serve folks who stopped out from your institution, right? Because all the other adults you're talking to are stop outs from somewhere. Okay. So you got to get good at that. And if you can't get good in your backyard, you're going to struggle out there. Okay. That's number one. Number two, like I talked about removing friction earlier, like obviously, like assess, secret shop, get a consultant, go through it yourself, do what you have to do. There's friction in that process. I promise you. Um, and most of it isn't undefined process, right? But if you go to a website of a university and you have an admissions background, um, did you all have a specific page for returning stop out students?
We did not.
You did not. Yeah. Well, you didn't have a lot of stop out students, I think, where you were an admissions officer, if I
I was
remember.
like, yeah, Kenyon is a
Yeah.
small,
Love.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe bad example. And even Wake didn't have very many. Um,
Yeah, but I go on a lot of admissions. So I rarely like sometimes I'll see, and I think even sometimes the language is like it's challenging. Is it like adult learners or is it like what is the language for that folks might be looking for, which I think is tough too.
well, newsflash, you can do both on your website. It doesn't matter which one they go to. They might be a stop out student. They might think of themselves as an adult. Do
Yeah.
both. Okay. So, doesn't have to be hard. Um, when you get to that language, I just assessed this for a whole statewide group of regional public institutions. Um, it's almost always about process. Okay. And it has lots of steps and lots of variables and things like that. That's not what people need to know, right? It is intent, right? If you can't invest in intent a little bit and helping people, get a line on why they're going back and making sure that you can serve the reasons around why they're going back and get comfortable with having that conversation, then it's just going to be awkward,
Hmm.
right? If they've already made the decision to come back, the likelihood that they're going to pick you, tough, because those big institutions are spending tens of millions of dollars on marketing budgets, right? It is if somebody's already made the decision, then they're seeing ads, right? Your best bet is with those 10,000 people that have stopped out from your institution to be in touch with them, right? And when they're ready to come back, know that this is the right place and have discussions around intent and why and motivation and things like that. That that would be a couple of the places I would start because that's what we do, right? One of the nice things about the admission cycle is it's very predictable.
Hmm.
Okay. Right. In the fall, kids are going to start thinking about it because they got to apply and they had to have taken their tests until a few years ago. But, they got that. And then, they've got to, these dates better than I do, but it might be December 1 or January 1. They have to apply. Right. In March, those announcements are coming out and May 1, decision time, deposit time, there it is. And then, fight off summer melt. And then they start in the fall. And that's not how, the adult market works. So when we are doing this work, we assume a long tail enrollment cycle, right? There's
Hmm.
not a long tail enrollment cycle in freshmen because they go through that cycle and they start or they don't. And if they don't start the year after they graduate from high school, they're almost never gonna. They're not gonna start the next year. You might. Do you know how many people start after taking a 1 year gap?
I imagine it's very low, less than 10%.
Closer to one.
One. Okay.
Yeah, it's a tiny. And you think about it from maybe back in your days of seeing students coming through. It's a tiny number, right? That's that. So anyway, um, in so what we do is we don't assume we know the dates they're going to make these decisions. We don't assume that they're ready. We
Hmm.
don't assume they have intent, and we don't assume they're going to try and apply or even ask them to apply until they have intent. So we see three waves, right? We're reaching out to a list. We've working with an institution. They're like, here's 10,000 people. Reach out to them all at once. We can do that, technically and technologically. And from a data perspective, that's easy. We get it out there. Some of them are going to go, I just needed a kick. I just needed a nudge, right? And they're going to be back in the first 3 months, first 6 months. That's great.
Hmm.
The next wave, they're going to have one of those barriers in their lives or some friction from the institution, right? Of some kind of hold, right? They're just going to take longer, right? It's not going to be 3 months, might be 6, can be up to 12. We don't get to stop reaching out to them. We have to stay in contact. The number of touch points we have with students before they re-enroll, do you know what that number is on average?
Um, 75.
Oh, it's 47.
Okay.
Um, wow. It's a fair amount.
Those
So
are all touch points. Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of touch points.
That's across like phone, text, email, all the above. Yeah.
Everything, all the above. Um, then the easy way to think about it is there's those students that have some barrier and some friction, right? They're going to be 12 to 18 months. that's common with us, right? That's, we work with it. That's our long tail enrollment cycle. We
Yeah.
don't assume you're ready to enroll in this fall. Like, I don't know what you got going on in your life. Could you re-enroll and take another degree starting in September?
Now we have like a 1-year-old at home and,
Oh, so
yeah.
wouldn't work for you right now. Well,
Yeah.
marketing agency, I
Yeah.
take the Will Geiger file and I disposition that lead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. I say he's not going to enroll. If I'm re-up, I'm going to say he might next year. Let's stay in touch with him. Let's see how it's going. When we start to get some signals he's actually interested, we'll talk process.
Yeah, and it just seems like for traditional enrollment shops, you're like much more set up to work on this like very that fixed calendar where you have all of your learnings, all of your results within a year. And I just imagine people are like, okay, this is not working for like 6 or 8, 12 months. Like, what's the point of doing this?
Mhm,
And you just truly have to take like a much longer view than I think. And I'm sure it's challenging just for like that's probably really hard to get feedback. Like, how do you improve your process if it's like a
mhm,
kind of inconsistent, more difficult to even get feedback over this longer time horizon? So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Just for folks to work with people like like your team at ReUp, just where you have the data, you've taken the longer view, you have the strategies and the macro and big picture.
yeah. The number of students that say to us, just having somebody that stuck with me
Hmm.
made all the difference, right? Because if
Yeah,
this is a lead gen campaign, you don't, you're not qualified, you don't, make it to the next status, you just get pushed out of the database.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, it's
And yeah, so
yeah, no, I didn't think about it from that perspective. Just the, the life cycle of enrollment marketing really is just so much different. This has been really great, Scott. I'd love to wrap up with a question, just a few. This has been really interesting and would love to, you know, leave on if there's a particular story of a student that you're aware of through re-up, if you just have a favorite success story that you might share.
I have a million. This is like, you want to have a rewarding job, um, you know, do this, right? This is gonna make a difference in somebody's life, and it is almost certainly gonna have a generational impact.
Mm,
Like
that's a good
this,
reminder. Yeah.
this is rewarding work. Um, but you said favorite?
Yes. If you were to
Okay,
pick one.
I can
No,
pick
sorry.
one. Easy. So I already mentioned it to you. It's my mom, right? So when I was young, my mom, who had dropped out of college when she got married, out of UCLA, as a matter of fact, when she got married, and a couple years later, started having kids. Always baffles me, to be perfectly honest. People dropped out just because they got married back in the day, and the kids came later. Anyway, so you know, long and short of it, we were living in Southeast Washington State, and my parents got divorced. My mom had 3 young kids and half a degree, and that wasn't going to work for her long term. But so she started going back, and I sat outside the classroom, a lot of nights at community colleges and things like that. And the simple way to think about the story is my mom was my preschool teacher.
Hmm.
Uh-huh. And then she went back and got a degree and then another one. And my mom was my elementary principal.
Hmm.
And in high school, my mom was the superintendent.
What a great story.
Yeah. So that's my favorite story because I grew up
Yeah.
with it. And I think that's, one of the reasons I do this work today is just to see that happen for more people and more families.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's and such a great reminder. Just it's touching like one person, but just the impact of that in a family and like community, friends and peers. That's yeah, I think a very, very, very powerful thing. Just to especially I'm sure there's a lot of as we've discussed in this conversation, lots of reasons that people, lots of friction, and just a
Mhm.
little bit of motivation and an example to get past some of that friction. Um, Well, thanks so much, Scott. This has been such a treat talking to you. We'll definitely drop some links to
Thank you.
ReUp and the great work that you all are doing. But thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you, Will.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.